Hello and welcome to Westminster Watch with me, Nick de Bois. When Keir Starmer became Prime Minister, he pledged that he would end the culture wars once and for all. With Britain struggling with a cost of living crisis, with war on the European continent, the Prime Minister says there are far more important things to worry about. But does the country feel the same way? The last decade or so has seen dividing lines across culture, segregating left and right, and defining elections. Brexit was arguably the most divisive of issues, with the 2016 referendum leading to bitter debates, not just in Parliament, but virtually in every home in the country. It was a major part of Boris Johnson's massive election win in 2019. But while the Conservatives tried the same trick at the most recent election, it failed, with Labour winning an even larger majority. So have the British public become bored of the war on woke? Our reporter, Tom Sullivan, explains.
Woke, defined by the Cambridge Dictionary as aware, especially of social problems such as racism and inequality. But wrapped up in that uncontroversial definition is a festering fault line in British and Western society. Call it luxury beliefs, as Suella Braverman did, or political correctness gone mad, to give it its original name. It adds up to the same thing. To the right, it means indoctrinated youth, motivated by a misplaced sense of shame about their history and their culture.
And it's our favourite subject, mad wokery.
These statues draw on racial stereotypes.
Do you think you even really know what culture wars are?
Do-gooders, virtue signallers, snowflakes, taught to hate their country by left-wing teachers and academics. Doing things like toppling statues of historical figures, judging them by today's moral standards, and spreading a malign left-wing influence through schools, higher education, and throughout the entire media environment. Of course, for the so-called woke, the reality could not be more different. They say reality has a liberal bias, and woke simply means ensuring equality, supporting minorities against discrimination, and acknowledging the evils of colonialism and white supremacy. Nothing illustrates that better than this symbol. Taken from across the pond, the concept of taking the knee became a defining symbol of Premier League football in the UK, performed at the start of every game for months on end. It's something that quickly became associated with the Black Lives Matter movement. Even Keir Starmer and his deputy Angela Rayner did it back in 2020. But that was then when they were in opposition, and it's highly unlikely you'd catch the new Prime Minister doing that today. While the Conservatives had been able to set the agenda and attack Labour under the left-wing Jeremy Corbyn, they found it much harder with his centrist successor.
The Prime Minister may be running the country, but he's still an MP, elected by a constituency. Keir Starmer's patch of Holborn and St Pancras happens to be where our offices are based, and it's also become home to one of the latest flashpoints in the culture wars. We've ventured out into the new Prime Minister's constituency. Welcome to Tavistock Square Gardens in Bloomsbury in the heart of London, where it's noted for its relationship with many famous British authors. Charles Dickens used to live around here. It's where he wrote Bleak House and A Tale of Two Cities. But he may not be the British author most associated with this area. Virginia Woolf spent much of her life a stone's throw from here. This is the house in Gordon Square, where she lived after her father died. She was part of the Bloomsbury group, made up of artists, philosophers and writers who were at the cutting edge of culture. And she is, of course, honoured here by this statue, marking her significance to this area of London. And I'm now joined by her great-niece, author, broadcaster, Emma Woolf. Emma, welcome.
Lovely to be here.
So tell us a little bit about why we have this statue here of Virginia Woolf?
Well, first thing to say is we're in Tavistock Square, and just to remind everybody, Leonard and Virginia Woolf moved back into London, into Tavistock Square, exactly 100 years ago. So that's a lovely thing. 1924, they moved back into London. Now, Virginia was a novelist, a sort of a feminist, a progressive thinker and writer of the early 20th century. She was born in 1882 and was very, very much at the forefront of 20th century literature and of modernism, sort of led by Virginia and James Joyce and people like that.
And this was an area of progressives, wasn't it? And what we mean by that is, if you like, they were bucking the traditions, they were bucking the establishment, they were new thinkers, weren't they?
They were absolutely new thinkers. And the exciting thing about this area, about Bloomsbury, in the heart of central London, is this is where the Bloomsbury group, the thinkers, the artists, economists like Maynard Keynes, really, really exciting political thinking and writing, and Duncan Grant, Vanessa Bell, really important artists. This is where they were living. They were living in houses around these squares, Woburn Square, Tavistock Square, Gordon Square, Fitzroy Square. All of them are sort of honoured by these blue plaques to the Bloomsbury group.
And so how do you now feel that the local council, Camden Council here in London, have decided to introduce a QR code near her statue to put an alternative perspective that doesn't reflect well on Virginia Woolf?
It doesn't reflect well. I mean, they've talked of potentially offensive attitudes, of anti-Semitism, of homophobia, of sort of classism, snobbery, this kind of thing. And it feels very, very anachronistic, Nick. The point is, Virginia Woolf was born in 1882. To expect a woman who was born 142 years ago, who was writing 100 years ago, to be expressing the same kind of woke, politically correct views that we now expect from people in 2024 is absolutely ludicrous.
She said things then that are definitely not acceptable now. She referred to someone, for example, as having an arm as black as a monkey's.
Yes.
Is there any harm in highlighting that those views existed and giving it context?
Well, are we going to do that for every single writer? I think it's actually more respectful to readers to understand that they will get it. They will get that she was writing 100 years ago. It's ludicrous to object to that when that was totally normal. And in fact, it undermines Virginia's writing, and it undermines the fact that she was socially progressive. She was a great feminist. She was a great political, she was at the forefront of all of this. She was doing really exciting things, pushing the boundaries of literary modernism in so many ways. So,
let me also explore this with you. We've talked about your great aunt being a forward thinker, someone who's thinking. The very idea that we now have near her statue a QR code is basically telling other people what to think of her.
And this is a woman, you couldn't make it up. This is a woman who spent her whole life trying to express what's inside by words. And instead of which we have her statue and then this QR code beside the statue, where people are going to be standing there with their phones staring at a screen. I would much prefer them to come to the statue with their copies, and in the summer when it's nice weather, maybe not so much when it's cold, in nice weather you will see tourists. Look, they leave flowers for her. You will see tourists with their favourite copies of Virginia Woolf, some of the great novels, To the Lighthouse, Mrs. Dalloway, The Waves. They have their wonderful annotated dog-eared copies of her books that they adore. Forget the QR codes, forget the mobile phones. Virginia existed in a time way before that.
Let me ask you this. Time passes. Do you think this idea of putting this, let's be generous, this context, this other side, which leads to us judging people today by today's standards for things they did over a century ago, do you think this will pass in time?
But it's also inaccurate. She married into the Woolf family, into a Jewish family. She made jokes about marrying a Jew. She said, I'm to marry a penniless Jew. About Leonard. She adored my great uncle Leonard. She adored him. Yes, she made some jokes about Jews in that time. Yes, she used the N-word. People did in those days. We have moved on. it's actually inaccurate and it's offensive. It's offensive to the Woolf family because mud sticks. When you use phrases like anti-Semitism, that kind of thing sticks with people.
So tell me, personally, your family must feel very offended by this, and in some senses you are almost on a mission.
I am.
To put context back to Virginia Woolf. What does the literary profession today make of this context that is being provided, where we're judging people by standards of today, whether it's incorrect or correct, by what they did? Do you find that people are supporting you in the literary profession, or are they buying into this, what's described as woke culture?
If people have read Virginia's work, but also her letters and her diaries, they're absolutely in support of all this, because they understand that Virginia was a very, very complex woman, like all of us. I mean, all human beings are, and that was her whole mission, was to try and get inside people's heads. And I think people are overwhelmingly in support. People adore Virginia Woolf. It's funny, isn't it? So many people haven't read her, but they still know of her. She's still a household name. You know, you talk to cabbies in London, you talk to taxi drivers, and everybody knows about Virginia Woolf. And what I would like Camden Council to be doing, and I've tried to find out from Camden with no proper response, tried to find out, has any of them read her work? Where does this trigger warning come from? None of them have read her. This sort of weird Stasi have decided that she needs a trigger warning. Well, are we going to do that all over Stratford-upon-Avon for William Shakespeare? You know, we need to give readers, we need to credit them with intelligence. We need to credit them with the understanding that...
What would you say, if I may, to younger generations who often are the ones who are said to welcome this move to so-called wokeism? What would you say to them if they were standing here now about Virginia Woolf?
I would explain that she was writing at a very different time. I would explain that she was actually very, very socially progressive. To call her homophobic when she was passionately in love with women, to call her anti-Semitic when she was married to a Jew, all of this.
It was suggested she'd actually had an affair, in fact, wasn't it, with another woman?
She may well have had she certainly had a very intense intellectual affair with Vita Sackville West. Whether it was a physical relationship, we don't know. But she wrote Orlando, which is all about gender fluidity. A man who becomes a woman who goes back to being a man who goes back to being a woman. This is really, really exciting stuff. So what I would say to readers and to younger people is read her. Read Virginia's work. And I will fight for the Woolf family, and I will defend Virginia. I will defend Virginia Woolf until the day I die. And I hope, Nick, that in 142 years' time, my great niece is standing here defending me, because come on, we cannot expect Virginia to be writing to our standards of today.
Emma Woolf, thanks very much for joining us here by the statue of your great aunt, Virginia Woolf, here in Bloomsbury in London.
Thank you so much, Nick.
Joining me now is author and broadcaster Amy Nickell-Turner. Amy, welcome to Westminster Watch. Now, we've been talking about the bust that is in Bloomsbury of Virginia Woolf, the author. Why do you think it's necessary for Camden Council to have put a QR code there that sets about explaining her views 140 years ago, when she was born, that really were the views of the time, and it seems that they're sensitive, that those people visiting the bust need to know these views that she expressed all that time ago?
So the worst thing that could happen for me is for people to just walk past the statue of Virginia Woolf and not know who she is or what she stood for or anything about her. And I actually think we're at risk of that happening unless we give people more information. So many people aren't even familiar with what Virginia Woolf wrote about, or even the fact she was an author. So if they can go to the statue, you know, the QR code, it's optional. If you're interested, you can look at it. I had a look at it. And to me, it was a brilliant introduction, a brilliant overview of somebody who, yes, was massively influential and deserves celebration, rightly so, but was also complex. I mean, I'm a human.
Yes, she was
I know
complex.
humans. Humans are complicated.
But that is true of all of us. But there is a very nice silver plaque there that marks her contribution and relevance to the area. I mean, the Bloomsbury was the heart of literary thinkers, political thinkers. She was a progressive, yet Camden Council have focused in their QR code on views she allegedly, and certainly did, express some of those views all that time ago, and it's frankly a little bit of a condemnation, isn't it?
No, it's not.
So why do we need to know? Why do we have to have the state tell us, because it's local government, when you're admiring this woman for all the efforts that she made and her contribution to society, you also need to know that she, for example, said she compared someone's dark arm to that of a monkey.
So Camden City Council, Camden is one of the most diverse areas in the UK, and the project is about representing diversity. I don't think that the information provided by the QR code is an invitation to judge of Virginia Woolf. It's instead an explanation to contextualize Virginia Woolf. Now, I think that the information about her views on race, they're a little bit too far up in the explanation, and really I think her exploration into sexuality, her exploration into mental health, and her contributions to feminism, which are quite extraordinary for her time, should have been slotted right up the top. But that doesn't mean that her views on race and her anti-Semitism isn't also relevant to the conversation, because it shows that, yes, you can be incredibly progressive in many areas, but you can also be regressive in others. That's part of being human. That's part of the complexity of
But why do we have to do it
nature.
around a bust of someone when, frankly, any exploring mind, probably more likely with people who are going to go and visit the bust of Virginia Woolf, surely, why can't people find this out themselves? What is wrong with this that we've got to a state where the state has to tell people what they should know and what almost they should think?
I would say, what is wrong with facts? These aren't opinions, these are facts about Virginia Woolf. If anything, they don't explore them in great depth, but you know, everybody has a dark side. Let's think about some characters from history. Coco Chanel, amazing, brilliant contributions to fashion, also a Nazi collaborator. That's part of her story. All these things included in this information are part of Virginia Woolf's story.
Yeah, but we're selective, aren't we? We're selective,
Well,
Amy.
commonly, we're selectively positive and celebratory.
No, I don't think we are.
All of our heroes
I
have a dark side.
I don't think we are. For example, if you walk less than 200 yards away from the bust and this QR clarification, this QR code clarifying some of the early views of Virginia Woolf, there is a blue plaque on a house celebrating that Lenin, the founder of the USSR, lived here. There's nothing to point out. He founded a state that murdered millions, that was an abomination on the face of this planet. We don't have that there, so how come?
But we aren't shy towards those facts. We aren't hiding.
But we're not. Well, I'm sorry,
that.
we clearly are. If we're going to have QR codes for someone like Virginia Woolf, who's an author, that's her crime, and for thinking pretty much like most people in those days.
Nobody is saying that it's a crime
So why
or
not have
putting
it for
any
Lenin?
judgment. What it's basically like is an interactive museum exhibition. That's great. That's making people be in touch with what Virginia Woolf
But
actually
it's not consistent, is it?
contributed.
And isn't that the point? It's almost like people are picking
No.
who they want to highlight negative aspects from their life that most of us could find out.
But you're finding the negatives.
Tony Blair, the former Prime Minister, gave Keir Starmer advice that said, do not get into culture war discussions, basically because it's a bad idea and it's not going to end well. This election didn't really have much about culture wars, but does that trouble you in a way? Because you go to universities, we talked about things like trigger warnings. We've got a situation now where speakers get deplatformed. We're closing people down in society. If they say something, there's a big pile on and it closes them down. They lose their jobs. This isn't healthy, is it?
I think that you're getting confused with cancel culture or maybe holding people to account for the things they've said. No one is owed a platform. If you have something like Oxford Union, they don't have to have speakers there. Student
No, but when
democracy
they invite them
will
and they are
deplatform
deplatformed,
people. But then, quite honestly...
That's different. No, you're not answering the question. If you invite a speaker to a university and they are deplatformed by action from people who are meant to have inquiring and learning minds, who do not want to listen to their views, that's unhealthy, isn't it?
I'm pretty sure that they will pop up elsewhere with an even bigger platform and an even bigger following. It's like
But it's
playing
okay then to
whack-a-mole
deplatform
with these
them.
people. I think if the student voice has decided that they don't want that on their campus, that is a good demonstration
Even though they've been
of
invited
student
there.
democracy. Even if they've been invited there, that's student
Isn't that
protest in
intimidation?
action. Isn't that healthy protest?
Intimidation?
I would say it's not intimidation, especially when the speakers that you're talking
Well,
about
that-
normally end up with a YouTube channel, millions of followers.
So
and
Israeli
plenty of-
ambassadors been turned
plenty-
away having been invited to speak from universities? That's not intimidation because the police say, I'm sorry, you're not safe?
I think if it is non-violent, peaceful protest on behalf of students, we should welcome that. And the opposite of that is a far more scary option.
Do you think that, in a way, I could say to you 4 years ago, the man who's now our Prime Minister, with his Deputy Prime Minister, during the peak of the Black Lives Matter movement, he sent out photos of him and Angela Rayner taking the knee. And you wouldn't get him doing that these days. I can't prove that to you, but I think we'd probably both agree that would be extremely unlikely. Do you think by, if you like, heavy virtue signalling of people from the England team, used to take the knee, don't see them do it anymore, Prime Minister used to take the knee, I don't suppose he's going to do. We have simply encouraged people to create this culture war toxicity at times because we've had a heavy level of virtue signalling without actually changing anything. Can you tell me that that's not had an influence on the behaviour we're seeing today, the culture wars that we're living through at the moment?
I find it really frustrating when people say virtue signalling about things that they maybe can't empathise with, and they use it as a way to close down generous-hearted people who want social justice. You can't say something is virtue signalling just because you yourself can't gather the sentiment to want to join into that. And I think that people taking the knee, it was always well-intentioned. Racism in football is a massive, massive problem, and we should still be talking about it today. In fact, we should be taking the knee until there's no more racism in football, which is nowhere near the case.
Interesting. So you say can't empathise with it. Let me be more pragmatic. Tell me, what did it actually achieve by taking the knee in helping solve the racism difficulties faced in many countries?
Because we're talking about it.
Well,
and
talking
every
isn't solving
time
it.
it's raising awareness of it. I think many
So is that
people
all
who
that
aren't
matters?
involved, I think the charity Kick It Out would certainly say that that is a massive part of their work, to raising awareness that this is actually something that's happening and is a problem that needs to be solved. How can we solve a problem if we're not talking about it? If
You
we
still
don't
have
know it
accusations
exists?
of institutional racism in English organisations. You still have accusations of racism, for example, in the Metropolitan Police. They were taking the knee 4 years ago. Did it do any good there?
Well, we've had Home Secretaries who have
Can you
denied,
answer that
who have
question?
denied institutional racism
Sure,
exists.
but can you answer that question? Because I'm not contending that. I've made a very simple statement to you that the Met recently has still been accused and has accepted that there is racism still, and yet 4 years ago, their officers were taking the knee. It hasn't actually achieved anything, has
The
it?
thing is, whenever we have information published, say the Casey Review that found homophobia, sexism, racism within our police force, it is quite often not met with the problem solving from our government that we need to have. So,
Is it only government that can solve racism? Isn't it about culture?
well, as a culture, I think,
Beliefs, culture, all of that?
but we're working all the time to improve.
But
I
you're saying
think-
it's a government problem.
But when you get resistance of people to taking the knee and people being highly, highly critical of something, of calling something gesture politics, when actually surely it's the start of something, the start of a conversation, it's bringing to the
We've
to
been
the front
talking about
a
race
problem.
for a long time. And this country, for example, has come a long way since the 70s. You're far too young to remember that. I remember the 70s. There were ugly signs of racism. No one was taking the knee in those days. It actually wouldn't have contributed anything anyway. It was society moving on. It was education. And I put it to you again, what you dismiss as what you value, and I call virtue signalling, I'm still kind of struggling to find any evidence that it's actually worked, apart from talk about it.
I don't think it can work whilst we have a government that denies institutional racism exists, while we have a government that's hostile to critical race theory being taught in schools. I hope that with the new government, we will make real change. I know Labour have talked about helping black businesses. They've talked much more explicitly about addressing these types of problems.
One final question, if I may. Do you think, we'll go back to where we started, do you think that actually under the Keir Starmer government now, we will see less of the culture war being enhanced by politicians?
I think the last government relished the culture war because it meant that they could distract from their awful policies and just shove the focus onto minorities that couldn't easily speak up for themselves. So I hope that, with this new government, the culture war will be over, because I don't really think the culture war exists. I don't really think we need to be worrying about a QR code on a Virginia Woolf statue.
Amy Nickell-Turner, thank you very much indeed for joining me. Indeed, thanks again to all my guests for joining me. And don't forget to subscribe to the TRT World YouTube channel for more lively debate and conversation. But for now, from me and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.